The year was 1907, a time when photographs were rare treasures, capturing moments that might otherwise be lost to history. In one small, forgotten town, a family gathered for a portrait that would, over a century later, reveal a secret no one could have imagined. At first glance, the photograph seemed ordinary. A father in a crisp jacket, a mother with a soft smile, two children clutching each other's hands. The light fell gently across their faces. A perfect, happy family, or so it appeared. Look closely at the photograph, and something is amiss. Hidden in the shadows of the parlor wall, partially obscured behind a heavy curtain, is a figure that should not exist. Its presence is subtle, almost imperceptible, yet there is an unsettling weight to it, a sense that it has been silently watching for over 100 years. Historians would later describe it as a shadow that belongs to no one, a chilling detail that transforms a simple family portrait into a disturbing image of forgotten events. The family's name, long erased from most records, was rarely mentioned even in the town itself. Rumors whispered through the streets. Strange children who vanished without a trace, eerie families whose doors were always locked, and haunting laughter echoing from abandoned houses. But no one connected those stories to this photograph, not until it was discovered decades later, hidden in a dusty trunk in a derelict estate. Photography in 1907 was still a meticulous craft. Each exposure was deliberate. Families posed for hours, holding still as the camera captured every detail. Every wrinkle, every expression, every shadow was preserved. And yet, in this image, the shadow at the edge of the frame seemed impossible. It did not reflect the light naturally. It did not match the angles of the room. Post-mortem photography was common at the time, a grim practice of preserving the dead alongside the living. But this was not a corpse. It was something else entirely, something that history had refused to name. The children in the photograph, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6, were said to have vanished shortly after the image was taken. Town records list only vague references. The children disappeared under unknown circumstances, leaving the family bereft and silent. In an era when missing children were often lost in time, the story would have faded into obscurity. But the photograph survived. It survived because it held more than a memory. It held a hidden truth. Look closer at the father's hands. Notice the slight tension in his fingers, the way he clutches the arm of his son. It is subtle, almost invisible to an untrained eye. But there is fear here. He knows something is wrong, something beyond explanation. And the mother, her smile is gentle, yet her eyes betray a shadow of dread. The children seem oblivious, holding hands as though the world is safe, unaware that the moment captured in silver nitrate would one day be dissected for its chilling secrets. The photograph was eventually sold at auction in the 1970s, labeled as an ordinary family portrait from the early 1900s. Experts initially dismissed the shadow as an accidental reflection, a trick of light. Yet, as historians and researchers examined it more closely, they began to uncover unsettling history buried in forgotten town archives. Strange families with forbidden languages in their journals. Vanished children whose disappearances were never investigated. Haunted places where echoes of laughter lingered long after the living had gone. And in each case, photographs seemed to capture more than mere images. They captured traces of a sinister past. It is impossible to know who or what the shadow represents. Some believe it is the spirit of a child taken before their time, lurking in the corners of the room, refusing to leave. Others argue it is the lingering presence of a dark obsession, a family secret so terrible it could only exist in the edges of a photograph. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: the photograph is more than a relic. It is a doorway into a story of dark history, horror storytelling, and unsolved mysteries that demand to be remembered. As we begin this journey into 1907, imagine yourself standing in that parlor. Feel the weight of the shadows pressing at the edges of the frame. Hear the faint creak of floorboards, the whisper of wind against the windows. And remember, what seems ordinary is often only the surface. Hidden inside every family, every photograph, are the chilling secrets of lives lost in time, of stories that history tried to forget, and of truths no one should know. The photograph waits, the family waits, and the shadow watches still. Look closely at the faces in the photograph, and you begin to see the story behind the smile, a story long buried in the shadows. The father, Jonathan Harper, appears calm and composed. His eyes, however, tell a different tale. They are sharp, alert, and restless, as if he is perpetually aware of something that others cannot see. Townsfolk remembered him as a meticulous craftsman, respected for his skill in carpentry, but there were rumors. Late at night, he would wander his property muttering in a strange, guttural language that no one could identify. Some claimed it was a forgotten dialect, a forbidden language passed down through generations. Others whispered it was the voice of someone conversing with things that should not exist. The mother, Eleanor Harper, wore a gentle smile, yet the edges of her eyes betrayed anxiety. She carried herself with an air of serene control, but neighbors often noticed oddities in the household. The children, small and innocent in appearance, were seldom seen outside the home. Their laughter, when it was heard, was peculiar, not the playful sound of ordinary children, but a hollow, echoing giggle that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Those who visited the Harpers described the air inside their home as heavy, as if the walls themselves were watching, listening, and remembering. The children, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6, seemed ordinary at first glance. But portraits and photographs taken at other moments hinted at something unsettling. In some images, the boy's eyes appeared to follow the viewer unnaturally, too fixed, too knowing. The girl, usually smiling, sometimes seems to look past the camera, her gaze lingering on shadows that do not exist in the frame. Family acquaintances later recalled that both children spoke of a silent friend who lived in the corners of their home. When pressed, they would giggle nervously or quickly change the subject, their words hinting at a presence neither parent acknowledged. The Harper household itself contributed to the air of unease. Their home, a modest but well-kept structure, sat at the edge of town, near an overgrown grove that locals avoided. Windows were always drawn, even on sunny days, and at night, the house would be illuminated by a single lamp in the parlor, casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. Stories began circulating of late-night visitors who never left, of whispers caught through cracks in doors, and of rooms where the temperature dropped inexplicably. Some claimed that if one listened closely, they could hear the faint sound of children crying, but when investigated, the rooms were always empty. The Harpers kept meticulous journals, though few survived. In the fragments that remain, there are accounts of the children talking to figures unseen by adults, descriptions of dreams filled with strange symbols, and notes from Jonathan hinting at ancestral practices long forgotten. Some historians have suggested these entries reveal a family obsessed with secrets too terrible to speak aloud, as if they were guarding knowledge that had been buried for generations. Others argue that the journals point to psychological strain, a family living in isolation and fear, consumed by its own shadowed past. Neighbors recall small, unnerving incidents. Objects moved inexplicably. Footsteps were heard in empty hallways. Pets refused to enter certain rooms. One elderly woman, recalling her childhood encounter with the Harpers, described seeing the boy stare at a shadow in the corner of the parlor as though communicating silently. The mother's reaction was subtle but tense, a warning glance that seemed to suggest the shadow was both familiar and forbidden. The house itself became part of the story, almost a character, harboring memories and secrets that could not be spoken aloud. At town gatherings, the family presented a picture of normalcy. They smiled politely, exchanged pleasantries, and never spoke of the unusual occurrences at home. Yet, to the keen observer, tension radiated from them like heat from a hidden fire. There were fleeting glimpses of fear behind their eyes, a recognition that something lingered just out of sight. Over time, the family became known as the Strange Ones, though the reasons were never publicly discussed. Only the photograph remained as evidence, a record of a family whose ordinary appearance concealed extraordinary mysteries. Even in later years, when the children were grown and the house long abandoned, those who found old belongings and photographs described a chilling atmosphere. Forgotten images captured moments that seemed to stretch beyond time. Shadows lingered in the corners, slightly too dark, slightly too alive. Faces carried expressions that were not entirely human, hints of a hidden truth that had been carefully erased from memory. The family's story, once ordinary, now reads like a cautionary tale of eerie families and unsettling history, of lives entwined with disturbing mysteries that refuse to fade. Look again at the photograph. Notice the father's clenched hands, the mother's careful posture, the children's uneasy smiles. Every detail speaks to a life lived under the weight of an unseen presence, a secret trapped within the frame, waiting to be discovered. And in that shadow at the edge of the image lies the promise of horrors yet to be revealed. A sinister past, long hidden, poised to unravel. At first glance, the photograph appeared unremarkable, a simple family portrait from the early 1900s. But as it changed hands over the decades, scholars, collectors, and curious onlookers began to notice something that made their skin crawl. It was not the smiling faces, nor the meticulous clothing, nor the carefully arranged furniture. It was the shadow lurking in the corner, half hidden behind the curtain, almost imperceptible yet undeniably present. The photograph resurfaced in the late 1970s, discovered tucked inside a forgotten trunk in the attic of a long-abandoned estate. Dust coated its frame, and the edges were yellowed with age, yet the image itself remained startlingly clear. The faces of the Harper family were perfectly preserved, frozen in a moment of domestic tranquility. But hidden in the shadows was something impossible to ignore. A figure that did not belong, a dark outline that seemed to lean closer the longer you stared. Those who first encountered the photograph described a sudden chill, a prickle on the back of their necks, and a feeling that they were being watched, even alone in the room. Experts in photographic history examined the image, initially attempting to rationalize the anomaly. Could it have been a double exposure? A trick of light? Perhaps a long-forgotten prop had been left in the room? Every explanation faltered under scrutiny. The shadow did not align with the room's geometry. The lighting in the rest of the photograph remained perfectly consistent, and unlike accidental reflections or photographic errors, this shadow appeared deliberate, almost aware. Post-mortem photography was a common practice at the time, a macabre way to preserve the memory of lost children and loved ones. Yet this was not a corpse, nor did it resemble any of the family members. Instead, it seemed other. Its form was indistinct, yet human enough to evoke recognition. Some historians speculated it might be an ancestor, a figure from another generation, captured in a supernatural echo. Others whispered that it could be a presence that had always haunted the Harper family, manifesting only when the camera's gaze fell upon it. The children in the photograph, oblivious to the figure at first glance, were later remembered in town lore as peculiar, quiet, and strangely wise for their age. They spoke of unseen companions, of rooms that existed only in their minds, and of whispers that no adult could understand. Could the shadow have been one of these companions, a child vanished from the world but preserved in another form? Or was it a sinister presence that had always been with the family, hiding in plain sight? Collectors and paranormal investigators who studied the image report an uncanny sensation when viewing it in person. Some claim to feel a subtle pressure on their chest, as though the shadow were pressing against the barrier between photograph and reality. Others described an unshakable sense of recognition, as if the figure knew them, as if it had waited a century for someone to notice. The photograph, once overlooked, became a document of fear and fascination, a chilling artifact of forgotten events, and a glimpse into a family whose ordinary appearance masked a mysterious past. Historical research began to uncover fragments of the Harper family's life. The father, Jonathan, had records of unusual behavior, including obsessive note-taking about the unseen, the unspoken, and the forbidden. The mother, Eleanor, had letters hinting at secret rituals in the home, performed in silence and secrecy. And the children, though vanished from public records, were described in old town accounts as extraordinary, bright, perceptive, yet forever tethered to something hidden, something sinister that lingered just beyond understanding. The photograph also revealed technical oddities. Shadows cast by furniture were consistent, except for the one in the corner, which defied physics. It grew darker as your eyes lingered, a visual echo that seemed almost three-dimensional. Scholars noted that in every copy, every scan, every negative, the shadow remained intact, unchanged by time or reproduction. Unlike ordinary photographic artifacts, it was persistent, resistant to explanation. Look closely at the curtain behind the figure. Its folds suggest movement, as if someone had brushed against it, yet no one else in the room appears to have been present. And look at the space between the shadow and the family. There is a deliberate separation, a gap that implies observation rather than coincidence. It is watching. It is waiting. And it is deeply intertwined with the Harper family, their children, and the tragic events that would follow. The photograph had emerged from obscurity, yet it brought more questions than answers. What was this figure? Why had it appeared here, in this room, at this moment? Was it a remnant of forgotten history, a lingering spirit, or a dark imprint of events erased from memory? Each detail, from the expressions of the children to the tense hands of the father, suggested a story of eerie families, hidden truths, and chilling secrets that no one had dared to tell. And as viewers stare at the photograph, the shadow seems to grow heavier, pressing against the edges of perception. It is a reminder that even in images meant to preserve joy and memory, dark history can linger. That even in a family's happiest moments, unsettling forces may hide, waiting decades for someone to uncover them. The Harper family's outward appearance was carefully curated, a father with a steady gaze, a mother with a calm smile, children who clung to each other as if the world could still be safe. But beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary household, there were threads of a history both strange and unsettling. Forgotten records, whispered tales, and old letters hint at a legacy that the town never dared speak aloud. Jonathan Harper, the father, was meticulous in every aspect of life. His work as a carpenter brought him respect, yet his personal journals suggest a fascination with things beyond ordinary understanding. Hidden within his notes are sketches of symbols, diagrams of rooms that did not exist, and references to rituals performed in secrecy. He wrote of shadows that moved contrary to light, of fleeting presences that whispered in a forbidden language no one else could hear. Some historians have suggested that he may have been experimenting with arcane knowledge, a family tradition passed down through generations, now lost to time. Others believe his obsessions were born of grief, perhaps an earlier tragedy, a vanished child whose memory demanded acknowledgement in ways too strange to explain. Eleanor Harper, the mother, presents a quieter but equally troubling story. Letters discovered decades later describe unusual practices in the home. Candles placed in precise patterns, whispers in empty rooms, the careful preservation of photographs that captured not just the family but something unseen. She refers in passing to watchers and guardians whose presence ensured the household remained protected. Yet the tone of her writing hints at fear, not safety. She writes of dreams interrupted by a dark figure at the edge of her vision, a figure that always disappears when approached, yet whose presence is undeniable. The children themselves were not immune to these strange undercurrents. Town records, though sparse, describe them as precocious, unnervingly perceptive, and prone to odd behavior. The boy, always quiet, was said to speak to an invisible companion in the corners of the room. The girl, though outwardly cheerful, would sometimes pause mid-laugh and stare into empty space, murmuring phrases that sounded like fragments of a forbidden language. Neighbors recalled small, unsettling details, doors opening and closing without wind, the faint sound of footsteps when no one was home, and shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. Some of the most chilling hints of the family's history come from photographs other than the famous 1907 image. In several forgotten post-mortem photographs, relatives pose with children who had already passed, their expressions eerily composed, as if the camera could hold life for a brief, impossible moment. The Harper family seemed to incorporate this practice into their daily life, capturing images not only of the living, but of the lingering presence of those who were gone. It suggests an obsession with preserving what should not have been preserved, the past refusing to release its grip, hiding truths in silver nitrate that ordinary eyes cannot see. Historians investigating the town discovered references to strange families long before the Harpers arrived. Accounts describe households with vanished children, strange gatherings after dark, and whispers of forbidden rites that no outsider could understand. These forgotten events were recorded in old ledgers, dismissed as rumor or exaggeration. Yet, when the Harpers settled in the area, many of these same patterns emerged: isolation, secretive behavior, and an uncanny attention to shadows. It is almost as if the family had inherited not only the house, but the darkness that surrounded it, a sinister legacy encoded into every corner of their lives. Even the house itself seems complicit. Visitors describe the structure as ordinary at first glance, yet the layout was peculiar. Hallways that appeared longer than they should be, rooms where the temperature dropped inexplicably, windows that reflected shapes that weren't present. The parlor, the very room captured in the infamous photograph, seemed to act as a nexus. Shadows collected there, lingering in the corners, while the children played oblivious to their movement. The walls, the furniture, the very floorboards, all seemed to retain memory, as though the house itself bore witness to events no one dared acknowledge. Small towns often forget inconvenient details, but some stories survive in fragments. A neighbor's diary mentions seeing Jonathan whispering to a corner of the room where no one stood. Another recalls Eleanor standing in the dark hallway, her lips moving silently as though speaking in a language lost to time. Children playing nearby later reported hearing voices answering back, though no one was present. These fragments, disjointed and unexplained, coalesce into an image of a family entangled in mysteries far beyond ordinary understanding. A family both haunted and haunting, bound to a past that refuses to remain buried. Look back at the photograph once more. The father's hands remain tense. The mother's eyes hint at fear beneath composure. And in the corner, partially obscured by shadow, is the figure that no one acknowledges aloud. All the dark hints in the family's history, the vanished children, the forbidden language, the strange rituals, and the haunting presence, converge on this single image. It is a record of more than a family's life. It is a record of a hidden truth, a sinister past preserved in old photographs and whispered in town memory. The children in the Harper household appeared ordinary in the photograph, a boy clutching his sister's hand, a girl smiling timidly. Yet beneath their innocent expressions lay secrets that even the adults seemed to fear. Neighbors recalled glimpses of behavior that was at once remarkable and unnerving. They spoke of the children wandering the house alone, conversing in hushed tones with figures unseen, their small voices echoing forbidden languages that sent shivers down the spine of anyone nearby. The boy, Thomas, was quiet but observant. Friends and relatives who visited the family occasionally recalled him staring at corners of rooms, not as if he were looking at walls, but at something that existed only for him. He would sometimes whisper instructions to his sister, Eleanor, and she would nod in solemn understanding, as though they shared a knowledge no one else could grasp. On one occasion, a visiting cousin claimed he had seen Thomas point to an empty hallway and command a shadow to wait until they leave. When questioned, the boy offered no explanation. The adults changed the subject quickly, their eyes dark with unspoken concern. Eleanor, the girl, had a different kind of presence. She smiled often in photographs, her small teeth showing, her hands carefully posed. But behind her smile, observers noted moments of detachment, a gaze that stretched beyond the camera's lens, a focus on shapes and movements invisible to others. Family letters mention her drawing strange symbols late at night, patterns that resembled no known alphabet, yet seemed to hold a precise meaning. Some historians speculate these symbols were part of a forbidden language, a tongue preserved by families who dabbled in hidden knowledge or dark arts. Others suggest that Eleanor's drawings were merely a child's imagination, twisted by the shadows she perceived in every room of the Harper home. The siblings' behavior became more pronounced as they grew older. Reports indicate that they sometimes disappeared for hours, only to be found in the attic or the parlor, staring at old photographs, including those of long-deceased relatives. In one chilling account, a neighbor recalled the children speaking in unison, reciting names of people who had vanished decades earlier, names that appeared in old newspapers as missing or presumed dead. When asked how they knew these names, the children offered only cryptic smiles, their eyes glinting with a knowledge far beyond their years. Visitors to the Harper home frequently noted other unsettling phenomena surrounding the children. Footsteps echoed in hallways when the children were alone. Objects moved on their own. Shadows stretched and shifted unnaturally, and cold spots appeared without explanation. Some accounts suggest that the children could interact with these phenomena, guiding them, communicating with them, or perhaps commanding them in ways the adults could not perceive. These behaviors fueled rumors of eerie families and haunted houses, yet the Harpers never left, never sought help, and never spoke openly of what occurred behind closed doors. In diaries and letters discovered long after the family had vanished, Eleanor's writings reveal a deeper understanding of the unseen. She referred to a silent watcher present in every photograph, every corner, every reflective surface. The children seemed to know that their home, their family, and their lives were intertwined with a presence that existed just beyond ordinary perception, a presence that perhaps had existed for generations, waiting to be noticed by someone brave enough to see. Post-mortem photographs of the family reveal subtle, eerie details connected to the children. In images intended to preserve the likeness of deceased relatives, the siblings often appear to glance at figures not present in the frame, their eyes focused on shapes invisible to the living. Scholars suggest that the children may have had an awareness of forces captured in photography, forces that linger, forces that bind the living and the dead, forces that make old photos disturbingly alive. The 1907 photograph, with its hidden shadow, is perhaps the culmination of these forces, a record of a family's secret existence intertwined with unseen entities in forgotten events. Even the children's interactions with outsiders hint at the extraordinary. Visitors to the house recall moments of chilling clarity, a sudden drop in temperature when the children spoke, a strange resonance in the air when they whispered, an almost hypnotic quality in their eyes. It was as if they could see beyond ordinary reality, perceiving layers of the world that the adults could only glimpse in fleeting, fearful moments. This awareness, coupled with their disappearance from town records, makes it impossible to separate their childhood innocence from the unnerving mysteries that surrounded them. The shadows in the Harper home, the hidden corners, the strange patterns in the children's speech and drawings, all point toward a chilling truth. The family's domestic life, carefully posed for the camera, was a veneer. Beneath it lay a network of secrets, vanished children, forbidden knowledge, unseen watchers, and disturbing images that recorded more than mere memory. The 1907 photograph captures only a moment, yet it hints at decades of strange, hidden activity, a snapshot of a household haunted not by rumor alone, but by reality itself. Look again at the children in the photograph. Their smiles are perfect, their hands clasped as though nothing is amiss. But hidden in their gaze, in their posture, and in the corners of the room is something far more unsettling, something they understood fully, though no one else could. They carried the knowledge of the shadow, the presence, and the family's dark history, a secret that would outlive them, captured forever in silver nitrate and waiting for someone to see. Once the photograph of the Harper family resurfaced, it became more than a mere image. It began to draw attention not only for the hidden shadow in the corner, but for the unexplainable occurrences that seemed to surround it. Those who came into contact with the photograph reported sensations that could not be easily dismissed, a subtle chill in the air, an inexplicable weight pressing against the chest, and the feeling of being observed, even when no one else was present. Collectors and historians alike described it as a disturbing image, yet it held a peculiar magnetism. Some noted that the longer they stared at the family, the more the shadow seemed to shift, as though it were aware of their gaze. In certain lights, its outline would become clearer, almost like a figure leaning forward, watching silently, waiting. Others reported hearing faint whispers when examining the photograph in isolation, voices too soft to understand, yet undeniably present. It was not only the photograph that seemed alive. The Harper home itself, even after decades of abandonment, exuded a palpable unease. Researchers who ventured inside spoke of cold drafts in rooms with no open windows, the creak of floorboards when no one moved, and objects subtly displaced, chairs slightly angled, doors left ajar, curtains shifting as if brushed by unseen hands. Some claimed that the attic, where additional photographs and personal effects were stored, resonated with a low hum, almost musical, that intensified whenever the family's photographs were handled. Neighbors from the early 20th century recalled moments that were dismissed as coincidental at the time, but which now seem chilling in hindsight. Lights flickered in the house during storms, shadows moved independently of natural sources, and fleeting figures were sometimes glimpsed in the windows, figures that disappeared the instant anyone approached. In one account, a young boy passing the house after dark reported seeing two children playing in the parlor, despite the home being empty for years. When he returned with an adult, no one was there, and the parlor remained perfectly undisturbed except for the faint imprint of small footprints in the dust. The children, Thomas and Eleanor, had long vanished from the town's records, yet their presence seemed to linger in photographs and reports. Researchers began documenting patterns. Each time the photograph changed hands, subtle anomalies appeared. Shadows shifted, faint shapes were noticed behind the family, and even the expressions of the children seemed to alter, a slight furrow in the brow, a glance away from the camera, a tension in their hands that had not been noticed before. It was as if the photograph was not static, as if it were a living record, absorbing the attention of those who viewed it and responding in ways no ordinary image could. Some investigators attempted to rationalize these phenomena. Could it be poor preservation, light refracting off the glass, or mere suggestion in the minds of the observers? Perhaps. Yet the consistency of the reports, spanning decades and continents, made it difficult to dismiss. People unaware of the photograph's history would feel unease, a prickling awareness of being watched. Those who knew the story often reported physical reactions, sudden chills, pounding hearts, and a creeping sense of dread. Certain elements of the photograph intensified the mystery. Look closely at the shadow in the corner. It seems darker than the rest of the room, denser, more tangible. In some reproductions, the edges of the figure blur, yet the central form remains solid, almost three-dimensional. Historians speculated on photographic anomalies of the period, but the Harper image defied every known explanation. Even modern digital analysis confirmed what early experts had feared. The shadow was consistent across negatives, prints, and scans, unaffected by changes in light or angle. Strange families, vanished children, and eerie households are not uncommon in forgotten histories. But the Harper photograph is unique. It preserves not only a family's likeness, but a record of the unseen, a hidden truth caught between frames, a presence lingering just beyond the edge of comprehension. Some paranormal researchers suggested that the shadow could be a tethered spirit, trapped in the photograph, unwilling or unable to leave. Others believed it represented a family secret so dark that it could only manifest in images, a memory too horrific for living witnesses to recount. Look at the family again. The parents' smiles are practiced, their expressions composed, but their hands betray tension. The children's eyes seem to shift subtly depending on the viewer's perspective, and the shadow in the corner, the silent watcher, waits, patient, eternal, absorbing every gaze, every heartbeat, every passing moment. The photograph does not simply depict the Harpers. It preserves the unseen, the unspoken, the haunting echoes of their lives and the mysteries that surrounded them. It is in this uneasy convergence of old photographs, vanished children, and strange occurrences that the Harper story finds its deepest horror. Each time the photograph is studied, each time the family is examined, new unsettling details emerge, as if the image itself refuses to remain static, as if history itself were warning those who dare to look. The Harpers' home, their lives, their shadows, all are bound together in a story of dark history, unsolved mysteries, and chilling secrets that refuse to fade. The Harper family was never just a household. In the decades after their disappearance, the town began to speak of them in whispers, in tones that carried equal parts fear and curiosity. People remembered glimpses of strange behavior, the soft echo of a child's laughter when no child was present, and doors that creaked open and closed with no one in sight. Over time, these fragments of memory grew into local legends, half-remembered stories passed down from neighbor to neighbor, each telling more chilling than the last. One account describes the children appearing to play near the grove behind the house, a place locals called the Watcher's Woods. Those who ventured there at dusk reported seeing shadows flit between the trees, too quick and too precise to belong to ordinary animals. Lights glimmered in the underbrush, though no lamps or fires were ever lit. Town elders later insisted that the grove was haunted, yet they never explained why the Harper children were drawn there or what they were doing among the trees. Stories of strange families in the town were not uncommon, but the Harpers stood apart. Neighbors remembered Jonathan Harper pacing the parlor late at night, speaking to invisible figures, his voice low and insistent. Some claimed they glimpsed Eleanor through the windows, her silhouette framed by candlelight, performing rituals too intricate to be ordinary housekeeping. When children played near the property, they reported hearing voices answering back, whispers in a language they could not understand. It was said to be a forbidden language, older than the town itself, a tongue used to communicate with presences that lived at the edge of human perception. Even in the decades following the family's disappearance, the town could not forget them. A local historian uncovered old diary entries referencing the silent watcher in the Harper home. The writer described fleeting shadows that seemed alive, a chilling presence that seemed tied to the children themselves. Footsteps echoed when no one moved. Curtains swayed as though brushed by unseen hands. Objects would shift from their places, only to return to original positions by morning, as if the house itself were testing intruders, measuring their attention, their fear. The photograph of the family, with its hidden shadow, only deepened these legends. Those who examined it often reported physical reactions, sudden chills, goosebumps, the feeling that someone, or something, was observing them. Paranormal researchers who attempted to study the image claimed that the shadows seemed to lean forward, subtly responding to the gaze of the viewer. In some reports, the children's expressions appeared to shift ever so slightly, their eyes flickering as if aware of the person looking at them. Locals, both contemporary and long past, began to insist that the photograph carry the essence of the Harper's secrets, a portal, perhaps, to the very mystery that had consumed the family. The grove, the house, and even the town streets surrounding the Harper property became subjects of cautionary tales. People spoke of wandering too close and sensing eyes in the darkness, a brush of air that carried a whispering voice, a feeling that the past was alive and attentive. Some even claimed that on stormy nights, the sound of the children's laughter could be heard, mingling with the roar of the wind, vanishing when approached. It was said that those who listened too long might find themselves drawn into the shadows, caught in a moment lost in time, much like the family that had vanished nearly a century earlier. The town's folklore also hints at a wider pattern. Other strange families, long forgotten, had left behind similar stories of vanished children, mysterious shadows, and disturbing photographs. Some historians suggest that the Harpers were part of a lineage obsessed with hidden truths, families who documented their lives in images and journals that preserve more than memory. Every photograph, every diary entry, every whispered rumor becomes a piece of a puzzle, a tapestry of unsettling history that stretches beyond a single household, hinting at dark forces intertwined with human lives. Even today, locals speak of the Harpers in hushed tones. When strangers ask about the old house or the grove, they are warned to keep their distance. Some insist that the land itself remembers the family's secrets. Others say that the photograph is not merely a record of a long-lost family, but a key, a lingering marker of a sinister past that refuses to be forgotten. And as the photograph continues to surface, in auctions, in private collections, and in the hands of curious researchers, each new viewer becomes part of the story. The shadow waits, patient, silent, a reminder that legends are rarely born from fiction alone. Look again at the photograph. The smiling faces, the children clasping hands, the father's tension, the mother's wary gaze, they all tell the same story. A family entangled in mysteries far beyond their understanding. a town that could not speak the truth, and a shadow that watches, unblinking, waiting to be noticed. The legends of the Harpers are not merely stories. They are a warning. The past is never truly gone. It lingers, hidden in plain sight, in old photos, in whispers, in shadows that refuse to fade. As the Harper photograph circulated among historians, collectors, and paranormal researchers, attempts were made to rationalize the shadow that haunted the corner of the frame. Some insisted it was nothing more than a trick of light, an accidental play of shadows on the wall. Others suggested double exposure, a common flaw in early photography, where two images merged to create ghostly distortions. Yet every explanation fell short. The shadow's form remained consistent across negatives, prints, and scans. Its presence was deliberate, almost conscious, and unyielding to logic. Skeptics argued that perception could be influenced by suggestion. Perhaps those who knew the family's history or the town's legends projected fear onto the image, interpreting ordinary shadows as sinister figures. Psychological studies indicate that humans are wired to detect faces and forms in randomness. Pareidolia. The shadow could, theoretically, be nothing more than an illusion. Yet witnesses report physical reactions impossible to ignore. Chills, goosebumps, sudden tightness in the chest, and a deep, unshakable sense of being watched. These are not the hallmarks of imagination alone. Others attempted historical explanations. Could the shadow represent a lost child, an unseen relative, or a servant hidden in the corner of the room? Town records and census documents offered no evidence. The Harpers were isolated. Neighbors remembered only the 4 known family members, and the children themselves vanished without trace. If the shadow were human, it belonged to someone forgotten, someone erased from memory. This possibility added a new layer of dread. Not only did the photograph capture something inexplicable, it preserved a fragment of history deliberately obscured, a presence deliberately ignored. Paranormal investigators proposed alternative theories. Some suggested the photograph functioned as a kind of psychic imprint, capturing residual energy left behind by the family's experiences, grief, and fear. The children's unusual behaviors, the parents' obsessions with forbidden knowledge, and the shadowy corners of the home might have converged into an imprint recorded on the photographic plate. In this sense, the image was not merely a visual artifact, but a vessel for something unseen, a window into the Harper family's hidden reality. Others leaned toward more supernatural interpretations. Some argued the shadow could be an entity tethered to the family, perhaps the spirit of a child lost long before the photograph was taken. Theories ranged from ancestral spirits bound to the home to malevolent watchers attracted to the family's obsession with the unseen. Every time the photograph changed hands, every time someone lingered over the faces of Thomas and Eleanor, the shadow seemed to respond. It was as if the image were alive, feeding on attention, sustaining its presence through observation. Even modern digital analysis could not explain the phenomenon. When scanned and enhanced, the shadow became more defined, yet still resisted classification. There was no distortion caused by lenses, no artifact of exposure, and no trace of manipulation. Experts in photographic science were baffled. Unlike typical anomalies, this shadow behaved differently depending on context, sometimes darker, sometimes subtly shifting, sometimes almost imperceptible, yet always present. It seemed to defy both physics and photography, as though it existed partly in the real world and partly beyond it. Some researchers began to focus on the children. Could their behavior explain the shadow? Thomas and Eleanor were unusual, speaking in secret languages, disappearing for hours, interacting with unseen presences. Perhaps they had drawn or summoned something, intentionally or unintentionally, that was captured in the photograph. Yet, if that were the case, what force had bound it to the image for over a century? And why had it remained fixed, independent of the family's movements and long after their disappearance? Questions multiplied, yet answers eluded those who sought them. The photograph, combined with the Harper family's history, leaves a lingering tension between rationality and fear. On one hand, there is a desire for explanation, for logic, for evidence-based certainty. On the other, There is the undeniable feeling that some things cannot be explained, that shadows, whispers, and vanished children might exist beyond the boundaries of human understanding. The photograph refuses to conform to either reality fully. It is both historical record and eerie artifact, a convergence of documented life and hidden truth. Look again at the family. The father's tension, the mother's guarded gaze, the children's subtle awareness of the shadow. Every detail hints at what rational explanations cannot fully resolve. The shadow is not merely a mistake in photography. It is a record of something else, something intertwined with the family's life, the house, and the town's forgotten history. Attempts to explain it only emphasize the depth of the mystery. The photograph is a mirror reflecting our fear, our curiosity, and our inability to fully grasp the layers of dark history preserved within its frame. After years of whispered stories, strange sightings, and unsettling photographs, the Harper family vanished without a trace. The suddenness of their disappearance only deepened the mystery, leaving the town with unanswered questions and chilling speculation. One day, the house stood occupied. The next, it was silent. No one knew where Jonathan, Eleanor, Thomas, or little Eleanor had gone. Every effort to trace them failed. Their belongings remained, meals untouched, and their beloved parlor, the room in which the infamous photograph had been taken, remained intact but empty, as though the family had simply evaporated into the shadows. The events surrounding their disappearance were pieced together from sparse town records, letters left behind, and the memories of neighbors who dared speak of what they had seen. Some recall glimpses of the children wandering near the woods late at night, their small figures illuminated by the pale moonlight, moving with an unnatural stillness. The parents, too, were occasionally spotted pacing the parlor in the dead of night, muttering to corners no one else could see. Then, one day, they were gone. Attempts to locate the Harpers yielded nothing. Law enforcement records note only a brief investigation, which quickly ended after no trace of the family could be found. The surrounding houses, which had once shared a sense of normalcy, became tense with rumor. Townspeople speculated that the family had moved in secret, perhaps escaping some unknown threat. Others whispered darker theories, that the family had been consumed by the very shadows they had long lived alongside, swallowed into a realm between life and death, a forgotten layer of reality only glimpsed in fleeting moments. The children's absence, in particular, left an indelible mark. Thomas and Eleanor had always carried an air of unusual knowledge, speaking in a forbidden language and interacting with invisible presences. When they vanished, so too did the whispers of their secret companions. Some believe the children had been taken by the shadow itself, drawn into an existence parallel to our own, leaving behind only the photograph as proof. Others suggested that the family had deliberately secluded themselves, abandoning the world to continue their obscure rituals elsewhere. But no evidence ever emerged to support any of these theories. The house remained, silent yet alive with memory. Photographs, journals, and personal belongings were left untouched, almost as if the Harpers had expected to return. Yet the longer the house stood empty, the more it seemed to remember. Windows reflected shapes that did not exist, hallways echoed with footsteps in empty rooms, and the faintest sounds of children laughing could sometimes be heard, carried by the wind. Researchers who visited decades later reported the same chilling atmosphere, cold drafts, shifting shadows, and an undeniable sense of being watched. And then there was the photograph itself. It remained, untouched, yet ever present. The shadow in the corner seemed to grow darker after the family's disappearance, almost as if freed from its role in the daily life of the house. Those who viewed it spoke of a heightened unease, of being pulled into the gaze of the hidden figure. The children, forever smiling, seemed to watch the observer as they had once watched the shadow, aware, patient, and knowing more than anyone could comprehend. Historical attempts to contextualize the disappearance often returned to the family's unusual behavior. Jonathan's journals hinted at ancestral knowledge, rituals performed in secret, and a preoccupation with shadows and hidden entities. Eleanor's letters spoke of silent watchers and whispers in forbidden tongues. The children, Thomas and Eleanor, may have been conduits, sensitive to the presences their parents had long courted. The convergence of these elements, unusual family practices, vanished children, and the photograph with its shadow, points to a truth the town could not face. The story of the Harpers is not just about disappearance. It is about the persistence of the unseen. Even without the family present, the shadows they lived alongside endure, captured in silver nitrate, preserved in memory, and whispered in local legend. The house, the woods, and the photograph together form a nexus of the unknown, a haunting reminder that some things cannot be explained, recorded, or fully forgotten. Look again at the photograph. The father's tense hands, the mother's cautious smile, the children's eyes, all hint at knowledge of what was to come. And the shadow, once hidden at the corner, now feels almost triumphant, as though the family's disappearance was a deliberate surrender to forces beyond human understanding. Every observer who gazes upon the image becomes aware of the hidden truth that the Harpers did not simply vanish. They became part of the shadow, part of the photograph, part of a story that refuses to end, lingering at the edges of perception for those daring enough to notice. The Harper family is gone, yet they remain. Not in the physical world, but in memory, in legend, and in the photograph that captured them, a single image that preserves more than smiles, more than clothing and furniture. Look closely, and the shadow in the corner remains, patient, unblinking, as if it has waited a century for someone to notice. Every detail in the photograph hints at a truth too disturbing for ordinary eyes. The Harpers were entwined with forces beyond comprehension, their lives a fragile boundary between what is seen and what is hidden. The disappearance of Jonathan, Eleanor, Thomas, and little Eleanor did not erase them. Their presence lingers in the creaking floorboards, the shifting shadows, and the whispered stories that echo in the town even now. Forgotten photographs, journals, and letters capture fragments of a family who lived with an awareness of the unseen, communicating in forbidden languages and preserving secrets that would haunt generations. It is a story of children vanished in plain sight, parents obsessed with shadows, and a home that refused to release its memories. The photograph is the key. At first glance, it shows a happy family, carefully posed, their expressions composed. But hidden within the frame is the shadow, a shape that defies physics, photography, and explanation. Scholars, skeptics, and paranormal enthusiasts alike have attempted to rationalize it, yet none have succeeded. It persists, unchanged, resistant to logic, as if bound to the family and their secrets. Those who stare too long report chills, sudden awareness, and an unshakable sense of being observed. Some claim that the shadow seems to move subtly, leaning closer, responding to attention in ways no ordinary image could. The town remembers, too, in whispers and cautionary tales. Elders speak of children playing near the woods at night, of lights flickering in the abandoned house, and of fleeting figures glimpsed through windows. The Harper story became legend, a warning that the past does not vanish with the people who lived it. The house, the photograph, and the hidden shadow remain as evidence that some histories are too dark to be fully documented, stories that exist in memory, in image, and in the spaces between perception and reality. Every attempt to explain the events, the unusual behavior of the children, the parents' rituals, the vanished family, and the shadow only deepens the mystery. It is as though the photograph is alive, a record of lives intertwined with forces that the human mind cannot fully comprehend. The children, Thomas and Eleanor, the parents, Jonathan and Eleanor, and the shadow itself are locked together in a silent narrative of forgotten events, hidden truths, and unsolved mysteries. They are reminders that even a seemingly ordinary family can be connected to something sinister, a past that refuses to remain buried. Look again at the family. Notice the tension in the father's hands, the guarded gaze of the mother, the children's knowing eyes, and the shadow lingering at the corner. Every element is a fragment of a story too unsettling to ignore. The Harpers' life, their home, their eventual disappearance, all of it captured in one single photograph, illustrates the delicate boundary between ordinary existence and the hidden forces that haunt it. Even decades later, it draws the curious, the skeptical, and the unwary into its web, forcing them to confront the disturbing reality of what might exist beyond sight. And so, the photograph continues to endure, a relic of dark history and horror storytelling, a record of a family whose life was anything but ordinary. It reminds us that old photos do not simply capture smiles. They capture presence, absence, and shadows that linger long after the subjects are gone. Vanished children, strange families, forbidden languages, post-mortem photography, and haunting secrets all converge here, in this single, silent image, waiting for someone brave enough to see. In the end, the Harpers story is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be experienced, to remind us that history is layered, that every photograph may hide more than it reveals, and that some secrets are too dark to speak aloud. The shadow remains, patient and eternal, a witness to human curiosity and a warning to those who peer too deeply into forgotten events. So, when you look at the photograph, really look, remember, the family may be gone, but the hidden truth endures. The shadow is still there. It watches. It waits. And somewhere, perhaps in the corner of your perception, it moves ever so slightly closer, inviting you to uncover what was never meant to be found. The Harpers are silent now, yet in their stillness, they speak. Listen carefully, and you may hear the whispers of vanished children, the creak of haunted floorboards, and the echo of shadows that refuse to disappear. The photograph is more than an image. It is a gateway to a history that should have remained hidden. A story of strange families, disturbing images, and unsettling mysteries that linger in the edges of perception. The Harpers vanished forever, but the photograph and its shadow remain, an eternal reminder that dark history is never truly gone.